And what neural earth is specifically around is understanding geospatial and temporal data, time series data, in which and how it impacts our daily life, and how that type of insight will go into our wallets eventually, whether it's financial transactions or purchasing insurance or whatever it might be. And so that's where we started with. And we built a lot of different technologies to be able to understand phenomenon on Earth, but then how do other types of phenomenon push and pull with the natural things that we see or as we see and look back at ourselves. It's like looking back at the mirror every day, but we're looking back at ourselves on Earth. We're actually not very good stewards of our planet, and for lots of different reasons. But how does that play out with different types of exposure to patterns of life as well as exposure to risk?
Welcome to CRE Radio for influential commercial real estate professionals who work with investors, buyers, and sellers of commercial real estate coast to coast. Whether you're an investor, broker, lender, property manager, attorney, or accountant, we're here to learn from the experts.
Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CRE Radio. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jay Darren Gross. This is a podcast focused on commercial real estate investment and risk management strategies. Weekly, we have conversations with commercial real estate investors and professionals who provide their experience and insight to help you grow your real estate portfolio. Today's interview is sponsored by Building Insurance and Risk. When you invest in real estate, it pays to work with a real estate investor protection specialist to protect yourself and your investment from catastrophic loss. The experts at Building Insurance and Risk focus on real estate investor protection. They provide you with multiple insurance coverage offers and a side-by-side coverage comparison. To learn more, go to buildinginsurancerisk.com. Today, my guest is Dan Lopez. Dan Lopez is the Chief Technology Officer at Neural. And in just a minute, we're going to speak with Dan Lopez about Neural's ability to better prepare and predict extreme weather events. But first, a quick reminder. If you like our show, CREPN Radio, there are a couple things you can do to help us out. You can like, share, and subscribe. And as always, we encourage you to leave a comment. We love to hear from our listeners. Also, if you want to see how handsome our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. You can find us on YouTube at Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. And while you're there, please subscribe. With that, I want to welcome my guest, Dan Lopez. Welcome to CREPN Radio.
Thanks, Darren. Great to be here.
I'm looking forward to our conversation. But before we get started, if you could take just a minute and share with the listeners a little bit about your background.
Sure. I am a defense and intelligence contractor by trade. Spent the last 25 years or so in and out of signals intelligence and geospatial intelligence, taking some time off to clear the head a little bit and do other things, but that's primarily my background. And got started way back when I had hair as a computational biologist turned pretty savvy with hacking computers. And along for a wild ride I went. So here today through a lot of trials and tribulations of shooting stuff to space, bringing data back down from space to make sense of the planet, and helping organizations like the Defense Department, the UN, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the list goes on. But how do we understand the phenomenon on Earth as humans have an interaction between the built and natural environment? That's my background.
Well, that's definitely an impressive background there, and some experiences there, I'm guessing, are fairly unique for most of the listeners. So let's jump into this Neural. Can you describe what Neural is and what you guys do?
Absolutely. Neural is a series of companies and a series of brands underneath a acceleratory research lab, a commercial lab that was really based on the premise of artificial intelligence and machine learning is not necessarily what you hear in the hype cycles these days. That's really to build up a hype cycle around specific subsets of AI, but that's not truly what AI is. So what we did was we built infrastructure to support lots of different things around machine intelligence and go to market with enabling specific utilization of that technology. So in this case and that's Neural Labs, that's the larger context. Neural Labs spun up a company called Neural Earth. And what Neural Earth is specifically around is understanding geospatial and temporal data, time series data, in which and how it impacts our daily life, and how that type of insight will go into our wallets eventually, whether it's financial transactions or purchasing insurance or whatever it might be. And so that's where we started with. And we built a lot of different technologies to be able to understand phenomenon on Earth, but then how do other types of phenomenon push and pull with the natural things that we see or as we see and look back at ourselves. It's like looking back at the mirror every day, but we're looking back at ourselves on Earth. We're actually not very good stewards of our planet, and for lots of different reasons. But how does that play out with different types of exposure to patterns of life as well as exposure to risk? Because they interplay. And we can get into what that technology actually looks like, but really it's when we think about transactional data, like imagine lost data from NAIC, you're getting a roll-up of a lot of what's performing in each state every year and things like that, but that's time series data. Really, when it comes down to the phenomenon, that is without the context of where. And so when we marry those two things, spatio-temporal is literally, if you remove those kind of nerdy, sciencey type language, it's space-time, and physics does not separate those two things. And nor should we when we're looking at what truly does a premium cost and what is the real value of that risk or not. And so how do we onload and offboard risk in different markets so that we can actually get an edge in the marketplace where some organizations are pulling full out of states and things like that. So we'll get into some of that, but that's really what Neural Earth is all about, is utilizing what we see, and our senses are very much in tune to five senses that then begets a sixth sense. Humans have touch, sight, hearing, all of the different senses, and smell, all those different awesome things that makes us human. But what's truly amazing about that is we co-evolved. We evolved for the idea to interpolate and assess patterns. And what we need to do with the telemetry coming down from space or other things that we can see or maybe not see is interpolate those ideas and pattern analysis, and then recognize those patterns to make better informed decisions, specifically around risk. And that's where we established machine learning techniques around understanding risk in much more of a profound way, a more novel way, that it's a graph. It's an evolving organism almost, where there's pushing and pulling of different things that overall get us a broader picture, a horizontal view of risk. And that's what Neural Earth is all about. That was one of our atomic units in our platform, is risk. We do other things, but risk is the underpinning of much of the financial markets in the world. So we started with that premise and then say, what are those layers that we add on top? And as you were mentioning, weather is one. Weather impacts the way wind moves. So where's the wind moving with particulate in the air from a wildfire? Where does that wildfire impact water tables and water turbidity? And vinters are thinking about how to ensure their grape crop every year. So that's really how connecting the dots and knowing the phenomenon is really something that Neural took as the heart of it, not by a practitioner of geospatial technology, but someone who's trying to ask those questions of how to become a better, more effectual actuary, to a broker, to reinsurance. And I'll pause there, but that's really where we started with, and we have now started to add functionality and layers to that.
Yeah, that's a cool kind of an explanation of where, or I guess how it's all interrelated, kind of thing, and that the time and space, um, or the geo, and all of the other elements that combine there. I'm curious, in your modeling and your data collection and kind of the interpretation of all this. Is it important to have like a 365 view? I mean, like all the way around the globe, top to bottom, left to right, or is it more something you can kind of pick out an area like the West Coast, the Pacific West Coast, or the Northwest and the West Coast, and that area, or is it just because it's the way the thing works, it's all the model just expands out all in all directions because of all the information that you're picking up.
That's that's one my favorite question of the day is really, do we look at the Earth truly with the blinders on? We actually are very good at doing that. We assume that when we get up, and I love this analogy, is that when we get up in the morning and we brush our teeth, we comb our hair, we put our clothes on, we check generally that our clothes are on, and then we go to work, and we may have leaned in and popped a zit or flossed our teeth or whatever it might be. That sense is where our brain is doing something called tipping and cueing. We do that seamlessly just to go to the store every day. We have these things that we have pattern recognition that help us, one, get along through the day, and then at night helps us see or think about things that might go bump in the night. And what that process is really truly unveiling is that you're not going to go to Google and hope for the best if they were just indexing everything in California. That would be, why would you use that? You would never use something like that. You want to be able to hop anywhere that the web might take you. It's a graph. It's a knowledge graph. And what we're doing with risk is allowing you to follow that graph in a more concise and precise way with machine learning and ranking algorithms that very similar to, say, a thing like PageRank, right? Where PageRank tells us this article is related to this authoritative article previously. And so now we can rank the more authoritative link backs to a single article that's weighted higher than something else. When we think about risk in a graph, there's going to be a house that we're looking at. We're going to look at a condo, or we're going to look at a commercial property, and we're going to look at that specific property. Now, if you were to think about how often you have to underwrite or go out to market for a customer who is wanting to get insurance policy for their condo building or commercial property or whatever, is just that property. Is it framed? Is it not? Is square footage, complexity of roofs? What is the roof made out of? You might have some people go and look under the hood, right? You check the nuts and bolts, essentially. What about everything else that's surrounding that property? We did a few different studies on the proximity to risk is not just something that is orthogonal or just this other thing we have to consider, but it's truly an ebbing and flowing of risk to that specific property. And that property's risk has impact on other properties near it or far away from it. When that plays out, what we've done is looked at something very similar. I would imagine that you have at some point in anywhere from high school to college gone to the lengths of understanding income inequality. But when we look at that, we have the high earners, the low earners, or no earners, And there's a distribution of that, right? There's a distribution of income inequality that we normalize. We have something called a Gini index, and that we use mathematics to kind of see the outliers, massage that, and kind of understand the general principles of inequality. And so what we do with risk is that, let's say a hurricane hits the west coast of Florida, which that's a routine thing now. When that happens, typically had been seen as an outlier, but it throws off all of your risk. Now risk is like this ballooned out thing that every house in a zip code is treated the same as the ones that are right on the water, or different issues that would arise from that flood inundation or coastal flooding or ravine flooding, whatever it might be. In the same sense, in California, we have the same thing where we have the proximity to wildfire is not just the wildfire that has happened in the past. It is using satellite imagery, we can see how much fuel is pent up in forest and in vegetation, and how dry it is, and how much moisture is in the soil. Because what happens is, when that hillside burns in Riverside, it's not going to be able to hold water. And so when it rains with an El Nino year, we're going to have some serious ravine flooding problems. Highways wash away. And now we're seeing this stuff in the news, but this is something that we can see. We can see it coming. We know how much fuel. We know where wind goes. We know where all of these other phenomenon happen. And so we can actually start to ascertain a broader picture, horizontal view. And AI, in my opinion, and I've been doing this for a very long time, AI is not artificial. It's augmentative. It is helping human intuition broaden its landscape, whether it's in natural language or understanding another language. Those are models, those are large language models for us to understand text and predicting out the next text. But there's foundational models that we build for understanding the earth. And that's different. That is, imagine though, we can now combine natural language that Darren wants to ask a question just the way he would ask his friend, his neighbor, his colleague about something on the earth, and go the full length of that inquiry. That is really what we're after at Neural Earth, is to be able to interact with insights that are planetary in scale, but for who you are and what you are doing specifically.
So I guess the question, and this is kind of the AI, and you kind of, suggested that augmented is maybe a better way to think of it. The number of data points that you pull from for your model, how can you describe how many different data points you're pulling from? Because I mean, I think of, like, when I was growing up, you'd watch the weatherman and he'd say there's a high here, a low there, the temperature's high, it's sunny, it's, there was basically a limited amount of information that I understood that he was pulling from. Then we got into the AccuWeather kind of model, where there's like satellite imagery and there's like all these different stations where they're picking up the things. I'm curious, in what you guys are at Neural or have the ability to do, beyond like what the weather forecasters use. How many more data points, or is it more of an interpretation of all of the current information that's being used to predict weather that's being used in your models?
In terms of how much, I'm not going to bore you too much with numbers, but it's approaching being able to tap petabytes of data. So it's not just one level of data, which is going to be petabytes. Back in the day was actually unachievable. Now commoditization of compute and storage has really allowed not just one, but a few different data providers to go very large. And what we do with our streams of data coming in, we also create derivative intelligence products. And those are the insights that we build for, it's basically analytical readiness, where we build different things that we can then, from raw data streaming in, we can then create what we think are telemetry for other things that we will need at an already pre-processed level. So it's not just satellite imagery, and I'll get into that in a second, but it is time series data, telecommunications data, computer vision, weather models that are historical in context. So not only are we looking at historical, we marry that with what we see with physical phenomenon of the now. We use those things to kind of get a better reading of where things might go. So we're not necessarily predicting a Category 5 hurricane on the dot where it's going to land or anything like that. If someone could do that, that's amazing. I highly doubt we have that capability yet. Yeah. But what we're getting at is really water temperatures, surface temperatures, atmospheric temperatures, currents, precipitation. All of these things fuel what then starts to utilize that, whether it's energy or precipitation or whatever it might be. And we know that there's a lot of energy or entropy, chaos in the atmosphere that because of the warming of the planet, it is not that we're going to have a warming climate just subtly over time. It is the intensity of storms. The atmosphere and the earth has to release that energy. And so where does it has these wells all around the earth, one of them being the Atlantic Ocean in the Gulf. That is where it releases a ton of energy. Another place that it does that is off the coast of Maine. And so if you live in Boston all the way north to Maine, you have terrible weather turning to way terrible. Like not even something that someone wants to put on a heavy coat and deal with that. It's going to be much more intense from cold and hot. Same thing where we live, right? All the entropy coming in from the Pacific, we're seeing that literally this week. We're having a ton of rainfall. We live in the Northwest. We know what rainfall is. We all are okay with that. But when it is intense, it is because that energy has to go and be released somewhere. So you can see a Pineapple Express or an atmospheric river hitting, but if you were to peel back a little bit and look back at the Earth a little bit further in resolution, we're going to see something spiraling. That's called a bomb cyclone. It's where the pressure, the barometric pressure drops so rapidly that it has a well in the middle and it's releasing all this energy onto the surface of the Earth, but creating that storm that enters into our coastal areas. We just went through a huge amount of rain in a short amount of time. And that's what I'm getting at is intensity of these storms. And that's where risk really starts to play out. What is happening with these storms that's not normal anymore? This is the new, but it's not normal to what we used to know. So having a baseline of what we knew in the past, what that weatherman was telling you, hyper local is what it's going to rain, it's going to be a wet commute, don't trust those puddles, those types of things. There's going to be lights out of millions of people over the course of a week. What are we going to do about it economically? That's where risk really starts to play out. And it's not just that home that we're insuring, but it's full markets that we're insuring. And that's where it gets really exciting for us, is to be able to be helping brokers and the reinsurance. That's how our main efforts when we launched the product was the ones that were most hungry for change are the brokers. The ones that have the most hunger for change and are hungry enough to change their technology stack are the reinsurers. So we flank the market. And so the ones who sell risk and buy risk are the ones who are the most risk averse. So they don't like anything new other than spreadsheets. And so changing that and the dynamics of using RMS or CoreLogic or any of these other types of tools is a hard sell for the carriers to the now. But we're trying to make it so easy that you can interact with these things, but also plug it into your existing tooling, that now you have a vantage point of, well, I'm not going to pull out altogether carte blanche of California. There's opportunities to play in California that even if I'm looking at Tahoe, there's areas of Tahoe that are totally fine. There's other areas that are not fine. That's the kind of decision making we want to be able to provide something that they can point, click, and understand it with a language that talks to them, right? That's the most important thing.
Yeah, I can't applaud enough the need for a better understood solution as opposed to a all in or all out kind of a solution, which I think, and I get it from a carrier's perspective. If you don't have the information or the ability to, wait out or uh, figure it out on your own, it's easier to pull out and then retool and get, maybe neural or whatever the information is to try and um, reestablish your platform so that it's a profitable. I mean, it's a go forward platform as opposed to using the old data and going out of business kind of thing. But I'm kind of curious, how receptive is the industry, specifically the reinsurers, because I think they're really the ones that kind of control the market. Um, how receptive are they to your approach, and are you seeing mass adoption, or is this kind of are there some outliers that are like all in that are um, understand and are willing to make the changes?
Darren, I think the euphemism of the day is control the market. That is an understatement. But reinsurance, the biggest of the big reinsurance organizations have adopted our technology. They're coming on aggressively to not only roll it out as a trial or a test bed of we have just another tool. It is to shift into this is a tooling that then downstream impacts their pricing models and so forth. Because what reinsurance carriers tend to operate with, what does my portfolio look like if I onboard this carrier and their risk? So let's create a portfolio modeling technique. So that's what we do. We have a way to take a portfolio or a collection of assets. They can be properties, they can be whatever, but assets can be pulled up into a portfolio of things, and then that can then be modeled with maybe your competitor's portfolio, your portfolio that may onboard a different company and see what your exposure to risk is, and then go into each property and look at each risk scoring that we do. That's a proprietary thing that we do. We rank based on all the things we know. We do a score between 1 and 10. We keep it simple. But that ranking algorithm is basically an index. It goes up and down. Could be going left and right, but we have a way to look at the delta. And then we also have, well, if we're in the context of a premium, then what is the estimated, like a Zestimate? What is the estimate that we think the market would give you for that property? Same thing for a broker. When you go out to shop a deal and you say, here's what this property looks like, and here's where these other properties that are performing, either with my competitors or with my other colleagues, I want to look at what that might look like in overall exposure to risk. And what does this specific property have that something doesn't have? Maybe it's a brand new concrete home that was built in Missouri because they're tired of rebuilding a certain way. And so that risk specifically, even if it's in a tornado belt, that risk of that one home is much lower than a framed home literally right next door. So what are those things that tell us the broader picture? This is what brokers need to quickly get an edge in the marketplace, to have that at their fingertips. You don't have to go to MLS. You don't have to go to all these different systems to find all the things you need, or even go to a third party to go do that for you. We have it all in one place to go point, click, and look at the situational awareness of that element in your portfolio.
So the reinsurance companies sound like they're invested in this option. I'm curious from a broker standpoint, uh, do you find brokers are then educating the carriers in order to get
That's
them to
exactly right.
agree to write a risk?
That's exactly right. And how we approach it, it's organically grown upward pressure from the brokers and downward pressure from uh, the the reinsurance organizations that are saying we are using these tools. You don't have to do anything we don't want you, but we have an insight here that tells us a certain thing. Same thing with a broker. They can't go and say, well, it's it's the same thing as like going to Zillow and say, hey, Zillow tells me this house is estimated to be this. I want to sell my house for that. Well, your house is unique. You can't just go say, or I want that price that it says on Zillow. But what it's doing is saying, here are the economics that are playing out, and there's algorithms that then that's always shifting, but it's telling you how that home generally would perform on the sales market. Same thing here for premiums. Brokers have now an edge that they can use, whether that carrier wants to underwrite it or not. They have now insights that are much broader but precise to that one property, and they can take it to lots of different carriers with that knowledge in hand. One of the things that shifted series of well, some of the country's largest family offices and insurance brokers shifted away from, or are in the process of shifting away from contracting out drone sorties or inspectors to go, independent inspectors to go, and risk adjusters essentially to go out and look at a property. Um, it's not it's not even inefficient, it's unsustainable. So what that is really doing is saying, we have a condo that we want to go insure, the whole thing. So go look at the nuts and bolts, fly some drones, do a whole set of pretty pictures, and do an assessment of the property. That takes weeks of several people. And if you multiply that by n number of properties in this portfolio, it's not just man hours. We're talking man years it takes to do some of these things. If we're not careful and you amplify that, we slow the market so dramatically to what's happening around us. We have no way to gauge really the insights that we can provide by solving 80% of the problem, by looking from space and other types of data to look at your situation around the thing that you're trying to insure. And that's what we've sped up that process. And so that's why brokers are the most hungry for change and also hungry for new tooling to give them an edge in the marketplace to go shop deals.
So from that standpoint, the broker's information and the ability to look from space, kind of thing, um, that to me would be more like the property specific, the characteristics, the hardscaping, the distance from the vegetation, what, those types of elements. Is that, am I understanding that right?
Yes, in essence, here's an example. Let's look at flooding problems in the West Coast. Let's look at West Palm Beach. There's a condo building that we're looking at, and one of the problems when you see it from space, or like I know a lot of brokers are guilty of going to Google Earth to go look at the property and see what's around. And what's problematic with that is that you don't have all the information. So then you have to think about, are you going to go to near map or someone to go give you elevation models and all these other things to get an insight? Quickly with our platform, you go to that condo and we show you that there's a highway that's built on a false levee. So it's elevated. And what that does is have a elevation up and over the rest of the elevation plane that is surrounding that condo. The way in which we see that elevation is actually showing a funnel going right into that condo. And the condo is like, what we flood it all the time when there's a storm or whatever, and just floods our basement. That's fine, nothing to see here. We can see that before we even have a storm. We can just see the elevation, and we know that the degree of which it's elevated is going to funnel water at an elevated rate of change faster than anything around it at the same elevation plane. That's a much different situational awareness that a trained observer just looking at, oh, this property's, this amount of distance from the ocean, is this amount of distance from these inlets or whatever it might be, is going to not have the wherewithal to have things beyond the human eyesight.
So is the platform, is it available to brokers? I mean, is it?
It's in private beta. Our first cohort
Okay.
is now getting onboarded for the last couple of weeks and months. And going into 2025, it's going to be much more publicly available, where you just sign on and you point, click, and off you go.
And is it a subscription type platform, or is it
It
a?
is.
Okay.
It is. It's got a kind of like a basic tier and then professional tier. And then enterprise is really where we do also white glove treatment, where we do custom analytics, or we do additional things with our own drone technology and drone data pipeline for things like point cloud analysis or other types of things that we might want to do for infrastructure around. Um, we might want to do for light industrial insurance. We might want to do methane detection or methane leaks that are now capable of being done from space. All of those different types of things we can now do as white glove treatment. It's typically when you get into the enterprise levels, a little bit more involved with a commitment, but it doesn't prevent a single broker to get on to use the tool. Typically, though, and this is based on my previous tradecraft, where the production of intelligence is requiring a one step further is collaborative environment. So not only do you create your own intelligence, but other people creating their own intelligence can now collaborate. And so we have the basic principle is there's an organization for a brokerage or a reinsurance or a carrier, and they add their colleagues that they want to that account. We are getting into more features rapidly now. So annotation, text to speech and speech to text to annotate what you see on the ground, or sub asset notation, so that you can see this on a map where you're looking at a condo, but you want to carve out, hey, there's maybe a proximity to a pond that is in another condo right next door, that is a flood risk to this property that typically would not have been in any kind of underwriting, because it wasn't in any recorder's office information. It wasn't in MLS. It wasn't in anything else, but you can see the proximity and elevation, and that'll flow right into that property. So that's the kind of stuff that those tools are coming online now.
So the situation currently has gone from good to, oh my God. How long before you feel like or do you have any kind of sense of how long it'll take for these types of tools to become more normalized, and the industry more able to go forward and with confidence, as opposed to just fear of its shadow kind of thing, like it is now?
I absolutely think in the next 3 years, we hope to lead the charge, but we think that there's going to be a top-down and bottom-up approach. So, not just brokers, but consumers are going to become much more aware of really what their property is in terms of risk, how they're being penalized by zip code or by proximity to other things, and being able to make decisions appropriately. It's not just going to be a blank and a draconian, here's what your premium is, and that's what you get. There's other things that go into that. And so when you start perusing consumer facing things, or you write that good faith check to buy a house, you're going to have a lot more information at the consumer level. So that's the organically upward pressure on the insurance markets. I think the other things that play out with the insurance markets themselves, there's going to be an acceleratory process of adopting new tools for climate and risk mitigation that are not what have been traditionally used. And so that will mean that there's going to be an obvious shakeout There's also going to be some ballooning out of risk that no one wants to grab. And so some parts of the market will crash. But that will happen for sure in the next 3 years. I would say we thought the horizon was 5 to 7, but the rate of change of AI and even our own ability to execute is accelerating so quickly that we think this will happen sooner. Just like when you start to look at storms, that, oh, well, we had not just one hurricane hit Florida, we have a hurricane that goes up the east coast of the United States and causes a 1,000-year flood. Right before that, there's a 1,000-year flood in North Carolina. The combination of that water and then salinity in the soil going all the way up from the mouth of the Mississippi and then into the United States, that salinity also hurts our ability to grow, and it's accumulating. So if you think of it not just for corn or any of the things we eat, but the price of your jeans and cotton is going to go way up because it's not just here in the United States. So you were just asking, and really want to close out by saying, like, one of the first questions you had was, how does this play out globally when I'm just thinking about this one house? The price of your jeans that you're wearing are made by cotton and all these other things, and cotton comes from lots of different places and sources. Supply chain risk is one of our next product going into our product suite. Logistics is another solution in our product suite. Field operations, that can be for firemen to power companies. It doesn't matter, but their proximity to risk and when to deploy is key. And then that also is key to when to send trucks. Your supply chain is impacted, and all the cost is this interrelationship of all of those different things. That's truly what Neural Earth is, not just a risk solution, but you will understand the planet much better by understanding when you walk out the door your proximity to risk.
Well, you give me hope. For the recent time, I feel like, or I felt like most of the keystrokes I put in the computer for most of my life are now being used against me. But I feel like what you're doing here, it feels like, or it sounds like, this has a potential to reshape the industry and make it a go forward kind of thing. So
That's
I'm
what we hope.
encouraged. I'm encouraged.
That's what we hope.
So, hey, Dan, before we're, or if we could, like to shift gears here for a second. By day, I'm an insurance broker, and as such, I work with my clients to assess risk and determine what to do with the risk. And there's three strategies we typically consider. We first look to see if we can avoid the risk. When that's not an option, we look to see if we can minimize the risk. And if we cannot avoid nor minimize the risk, we look to see if we can transfer the risk. And that's what an insurance policy is. It's a risk transfer vehicle. And as such, I like to ask my guests if they can look at their own situation. Could be AI, the weather, the market, whatever it is that you identify and consider to be the biggest risk. And again, for clarification, while I am an insurance broker, I'm not necessarily looking for an insurance related answer. And so if you're willing, I'd like to ask you, Dan Lopez, what is the biggest risk?
I love that question. Darren, I think we always go back to the Donald Rumsfeld, the unknown unknowns, and to peel away the unknowns so that you have more insights to make better decisions more rapidly, gives you a position and essentially the high ground where you can now make decisions with a clear head. And I think that is the biggest risk, is shoving our heads in the sand and hoping that it all goes away, and it's just not. And we have to, especially for risk transfer, how do we get local to state to federal to global markets to understand how to interplay with each other? Because this is not going away.
Yeah, well said. Dan, where can listeners go if they'd like to learn more or connect with you?
Awesome. You can go to neural .io/earth to find out all the things that we were just talking about today.
Awesome. Well, Dan Lopez, I cannot say thanks enough for taking the time to talk.
My
I've,
pleasure.
Thoroughly enjoyed it, learned a lot, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Thanks, Darren.
All right. For our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.
You're listening to CREPN Radio for influential commercial real estate professionals. For more information on this or any of our guests, like us on Facebook, CREPN Radio.